video today. Yeah, I know I look a little different every time I come on here lately. This might give you a hint. Okay. Anyway, I just listened to Alex Christoforou, and the link is in the description box below. And I think you all need to listen to this. Now, what do I mean about doubling down on a bluff? I'm referring to the United States and the collective West, the Anglo-American alliance, the New World Order, and what is being forced to happen around the world to try to get away from this. Really, what it is evil here. A set of rules that they set here and expect everybody to abide by, even though everybody else should be autonomous, pretty much. Now, I understand wanting to bring peace to the world, but that's not what this whole thing with the United States and the collective West, the New World Order, the Davos people, all of that, CFR, whatever you want to call it. This has been a very bad situation for everyone over about 6 decades now. We didn't take our role in the world responsibly as a light, as an example, but we turned ourselves into an empire. We were always kind of that way, unfortunately, but it really got out of control, as you've often heard me say in the last 6 decades or so. At any rate, my purpose in this video is to bring you Alex Christoforou's presentation, which I think you need to see below. It's absolutely critical that you understand what's happening here. Riots are literally starting everywhere, even in Israel, because Netanyahu in Israel tried to push a new judicial system where if the judiciary did something contrary to the will of himself or the Knesset, that they could just bypass that judge and throw it out. In other words, there is no judicial check on checks and balances. We haven't really had that for a long time. The people in power have made sure that they're for lack of a better term, I'm just going to say it this way, they're participants in tyranny and in Marxism, communism, for lack of a better term, just so everybody understands where I'm coming from. They've had decades to make sure these people are in there. That was my point with the FBI and the DOJ as well, that really the top of the ladder there isn't the only bad part. It's actually permeated throughout the entire system. And then they moved on to the DOJ, or the DOD, the Department of Defense. Now, the important thing to understand here is, and Alex Christoforou, I think, makes the point, and that is, if he doesn't, it may have been Brian Berletic, because I was listening to him too, of the New Atlas. The thing you have to do is make sure that you have the military on your side. I think it was Alex Christoforou that talked about that, with a situation in Belarus where the U.S. and NATO are trying to do another color revolution, overturning the government of Belarus, basically regime change. And so Putin has reacted to that and brought his military into Belarus, including tactical nuclear weapons. Not that he intends to use them, but that just means that Russia is going to be there to prevent this West attempt at a regime change in Belarus and a color revolution like they did in Ukraine, and where they've done elsewhere, where they try to do in Syria, et cetera, et cetera. This is how they operate out of D.C. and London and New York. So at any rate, I want to bring that to you. I won't talk here for very long. I just wanted to make sure that everybody had access to this video. The important thing to remember with all of this is, I've often said, as they double down and lose their grip, like Princess Leia said in Star Wars, the very first one, I think it was, when she was talking to the whoever that was commanding the Death Star. I forget his name right now, but she said the more you tighten your grip, the more we will slip through your fingers. And that's what's happening now. People are finally starting to turn away, coming out of Babylon, if you will. But nations doing this. Okay, I'm not saying this is a good thing. I'm not saying that it's the salvation of the world. I'm not telling you that. I'm just telling you that things are on the move, and it's really good in one situation. It's really bad in another, because, as I said, the people in D.C. and London and New York would just soon destroy, and Davos would just as soon destroy everything rather than lose power. So that's a danger to you. It could slip into a nuclear conflict. I mean, all kinds of things could happen. But the bottom line is, as I've been saying for so long, You are the ultimate enemy of the people in D.C., New York, London, and even some other places, which I won't mention here. You are the enemy. And so as they lose this power everywhere else, they're coming down on you. Look at this argument over the braces for the pistols. The ATF just came out and said, no, that turns it into an unlawful weapon. Under whose authority? Theirs? The Congress has abrogated, almost, meaning the Senate and the House of Representatives, have abrogated almost all of their responsibilities to these bureaucracies that are all in the executive branch, and they have no oversight. We have a few that are trying to hold them accountable, like Matt Gaetz, for instance, and Senator Rand Paul, Thomas Massey. There are a few of them, but there aren't many. And because they're not enough, these people are seeing this attack on their authority, supposed authority, and they're going to double down and they're going to come for more of you. Can you imagine passing a law? It's not an ex post facto. In other words, they didn't make a law and then start. Well, it's almost an ex post facto. This ban on these braces, just like with the bump stocks. It's not literally an ex post facto. It's kind of hard to explain the difference between them. But the point is, they're making felons out of millions of Americans who bought these things properly and legally. And they aren't a danger. Some handicapped people need these braces in order to use weapons. But you see what they're after. And I saw another situation with I think it was a senator the other day, trying to change the Second Amendment back into that situation about a well-regulated militia, and that means that the government has to regulate it. And he has this argument's going to go on forever. We just have to put our foot down and say, not only no, but hell no. Because in those days, as most of you know who follow me, well-regulated in those days just meant well-equipped. In other words, you don't have somebody showing up to the militia without his own weapon. They had their own weapons to bring. So it was, in that sense, they were well-equipped. They were ready to go. Training and all of that too, but the individuals were the ones that brought their own personal weapons. So, anyway, but that's an argument that you're never going to win with the leftists. You're just not going to win it. So the only thing they understand is force. And as I've long said, what's happening in the world today is now screwing down on them, and they're doubling down on their bluff that they're going to take over with their limited resources now, other than their weapons system. And unfortunately, these really evil people have taken over the American military. Alex Christoforou talks about that's one of the first things you have to do, and that's been in process for many years. I saw it while I was in, and I've seen it accelerate since I've left. Look at Mark Milley. Look at SecDef Austin. Look at John Kirby. Look at everything that's happening in the military. They're not ready to fight Russia. They're not ready to fight China, and I'm not saying they should. There's really absolutely no reason to do that. What they're getting ready for is to fight you. Do you remember this little sergeant? I think she was an E5 that came out. This was about 2 years ago. And she was talking about, if you don't get back in your house when I tell you to, I'll shoot you. If you saw her put that video up, nothing really happened to her. I think I understand what she did was she got mildly reprimanded, but it wasn't anything serious. It wasn't like she lost a stripe or lost pay or anything like that. I think she got maybe a little verbal reprimand. It wasn't anything at all. But don't kid yourself. All of these people that they've been bringing into the Department of Justice, the FBI, and the Department of Defense, they look for people like that. They want you to be worried about your government going to war with you simply because you demand your rights. Look at these governments around the world now where all these demonstrations are taking place. And the government considers these people dissenting against this tyranny as those people being the enemy. Not that the government should answer to the will of the people. And of course, there are ways, like they've been doing in the United States for the last 6 decades, to change the mindset of the people and what they consider important, so that now we've got so many of these people that think that we shouldn't even have a Constitution or a Bill of Rights. And I'm not saying the thing works. I'm not saying that. But they hide behind it, these tyrants, when it suits them, and then they come after it all the rest of the time. And I'm not being real clear about things here. I've got some things I got to do. You can see I'm kind of in the middle of a little change here. Look, when they realize that they've lost their control everywhere else, everything you see happening by the DOJ and the FBI coming after individual Americans, making laws now that then literally make them felons for having done something legal before, you know that your government's at war with you. And they've got to set up the legal structure. I'm not saying it's moral or right, but they have to set up the legal structure so that they can justify it in their own minds and to their lackeys that are unfortunately growing in numbers. Now, I do believe that more Americans are good people than not. But they really, the government and these leftist institutions have really had a big impact. And I'm not so sure of the percentages anymore. And the big thing is, what are they willing to do? They are willing to use force against you. They are willing to kill you. And you, because you're moral, you consider that reprehensible that you would act in that way. So they know that you're not going to take action against them. So they use that weakness against you. And of course, when they do it, it's all the poor people, they're just misunderstood, or, they've been suppressed for so long, or, whatever idiotic excuse they're making. But you try to defend yourself, and you're automatically a criminal, and worse, a domestic extremist, terrorist, the enemy. I've said this was coming a long time. I remind you again, in my presentations very early on, and even when I was being interviewed by news organizations back in the late 80s and 90s and early 2000s, I talked about going through the Army Terrorism Counteraction course, one of the first officers to do that, and when I heard what they considered terrorism to be, and it wasn't one definition like the FBI tries to throw out there to you, or the DOD, it was in their regulations, and at that time they had, I think it was about 24 definitions of what a terrorist is. Well, today there's scores of those, and you never know which one they're going to use to justify their action against some poor innocent person that's just trying to maintain their rights and call the government out for its corruption. Because calling the government out on corruption, they consider an attack on the government. The government does. A violent attack on the government, which is in fact wrong, because we're supposed to have that redress of grievance here. But regardless, that's where we are at this point in time. So I guess I'll just leave it at that. I was going to bring up something else, but I really got to get busy on some other things. So I guess I'll head on out. I'd love to get into the chat, but maybe next time. I'm not sure. I think tomorrow we might have a call-in show. I'm not real sure right now what we're going to do, but it's possible. So just remember, first thing that they wanted to do is to take over the enforcement arms of the government. After they got the schools and the institutions, they needed to get the military and particularly the federal law enforcement, but that trickles down to the locals, okay? They've all been set against you. And I hate to put it that way. I'd like to say we can have trust in them, but they've already proven that we can't. So what do? Well, at this point in time, you have to be aware. You have to get behind people that are at least saying the right things. I'm not saying that they aren't trying to trick you. Who am I talking about? Tulsi Gabbard. She's no longer in the government, but she's saying the right things. Matt Gaetz, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Thomas Massie, Rand Paul. I realize there are traps there. I'm not sure I can trust Ron DeSantis. As a matter of fact, I just plain don't. And certainly not Trump. The military, however, is captured. It's no longer of, by, and for the people. It is set against the people. And that means you. We saw that in the last 3 years, and now we know how that whole thing came about and who was the biggest driver behind it, or what was the biggest driver behind it. Okay, I'll leave you with that. Please go see Alex Christopherou's presentation down below. Again, what I'm saying here is as all these things happen where the people of the world are starting to turn against what we've been trying to force down their throats, not be an example of liberty and justice and all that, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but we've been trying to push our economic and our financial and our rules-based system upon them rather than a law, and they're rebelling against it. And the governments are going to use force to try to stop it, and all it's going to do is cause those governments to fall. If they want to start killing their people, that's what it's going to take. And in the moment they do that, look out. Well, the same thing is about ready to happen here. Probably down the road a little bit, but just be aware that they don't have any compunction. These people in D.C., in the Pentagon, in the Department of Justice, in the FBI building, they have no compunction about framing you, killing you, stealing from you, because they consider themselves to be at war with you. Again, I go back to the terrorism thing, and I'll end on this. I told you, I went back to the counterterrorism school, and just one of the many definitions was that if you have 2 weeks supply of food, which is very subjective, you have a firearm, and you are self-employed, you are, by definition, a terrorist. That was just one of the many idiotic, tyrannical, authoritarian, murderous definitions. They're not your friends. And unless we get more people like Matt Gaetz, Marjorie Taylor Greene, I know she has a problem. I know, okay, don't tell me, now. All right, I know all that. But you got to work with what you got and try to hold them accountable, okay? By the way, I don't think that will succeed in the long run. And you're going to have to, what have I always said? Keep your eyes on the horizon, your ears to the ground. Situational awareness on high. Don't get caught with your pants down in the middle of the street. Prep, pray, stay out of the way. Defend yourselves. That's always legit. But don't go looking for trouble. Prep, pray, stay out of the way. Go look at the presentation by Alex Christopherou in the description box below. I think you'll see why I had to come up here today and do this. Okay? Out for now. Take care.